Thank you so much for being here today at this relatively early hour. Before I start, I wanted to congratulate USC's Armenian Studies program and their director, her team especially, and all the volunteers and everybody who's making this event possible year after year. I think I second Shushan. This event is making a big impact in the community, so thank you for that. With that, I'd like to start with a story of a Zen master teaching Zen to a university professor. So this is, imagine old Japan. A university professor goes to a Zen master and asks him to teach him Zen. The university professor is basically, did some studies, and this is being Japan. The Zen master invites him to have tea together. And then the Zen master starts pouring tea into the teacup. Teacup is filled, but then he keeps pouring tea into the teacup. And then the university professor looks on and says, this thing is filled already, no more tea will go in. Zen master says, well, like this teacup, you're full of your perceptions and ideas about Zen. How can I show you anything new before you actually empty your teacup? So with that, I'd like to invite us to consider the theme today at Innovate Armenia of rethinking, relearning, basically reimagining everything. And that's it's a prerequisite for that is basically emptying our cups and be able to basically take in new ideas and new concepts. So with that, I'd like to go around and basically ask my friends to introduce themselves.
Hello everyone, I'm Artin Karatorian. I'm a fifth-year PhD student at Caltech. I'm originally from Tehran. My academic career started at Glendale Community College, and I decided to transfer to Caltech, did undergrad career there, and continued toward PhD, and I'm close to finishing.
Very good. Everyone, my name is Artun Dalbinyan. I actually began my academic career very far away from electrical engineering at Caltech, which is what I do now. My first job out of high school was at the Glendale Community College Police Department. I wanted to be a detective, so I ended up passing around parking tickets for 3 years. It didn't take me very long. Was that Richard? Yeah, I did give Richard a parking ticket at some point. So it didn't take me very long to figure out that this wasn't my ideal career path. So I jumped different bandwagons. I tried the pre-med bandwagon, engineering bandwagon. Eventually I met Richard. He indoctrinated me into his robotics program, studied electronics. I didn't really know anything about electronics at first. I almost electrocuted the guy by shoving a wire inside the electrical panel in the room he was teaching. So from there, I went on to lead the electronics team of the Caltech's robotics team. I also do research in an electronics lab. So it's kind of like a rags to riches kind of story. I'm a guy born in Glendale, not brilliant from high school, went to GCC. I just want to show that it's very achievable to get to Caltech, and I want to see more people striving to do that, especially in the Armenian community. With that, I pass it to Torgom.
Hi, my name is Torkom Pailavanian, so I also have a similar story. Out of high school, I didn't apply to any universities because I was planning to go to Glendale College. So while I was at the college, I was privileged enough to lead a team of students to design a robotic arm, and most of those efforts went into the current robotics and capstone program that the college currently has. So due to those efforts, it kind of helped guide me into Caltech in 2013. I started doing research in cancer, basically biodevices for cancer. And most of you, I hope none of you come in contact with somebody with brain tumor, but if you do, it's kind of a death sentence, and there's not a lot of effective ways to treat a brain tumor. In chemotherapy, you're lucky if 1% of the drug even gets to where the tumor location is. So what we're trying to do is use the body's immune system to get rid of the tumor and to teach the body to continuously remove the tumor whenever it recognizes it. And what we're doing is we're generating these magnetic fields to guide the immune cells to the tumor location. Aside from that, I was also part of the robotics team. I led the team for 2 years, electronics, and We competed in the International RoboSub competition, and we won in 2016, first place, and 2015, third place. Yeah. And these days, I'm working at JPL, doing underwater robotics and robotics in extreme environments, and just kind of having fun doing development for other companies as well.
Greg?
All right, so my name is Greg Varozhanyan. I am the only experimental biologist of the group. So I'm in the PhD program at Caltech. I'm in my 5th year. But before I tell you what I do at Caltech, I just kind of want to talk about how I got here, because kind of like some of these guys, I have an unconventional path. So, well, first of all, I was born in Armenia, but moved to the States when I was 5, and went to a community college, transferred to Cal Poly Pomona as a biology major, thinking I would go to dental school and be a dentist, mostly because my parents wanted me to do that. I think I secretly wanted to be a science teacher. So as an undergrad, I had this kind of unique and unexpected opportunity to teach at a private Armenian school, to teach science classes. So I kind of jumped on that. I took about a year off, and I was teaching as an undergrad, high school science classes. And this actually turned out to be a pretty important kind of change to my career path because, well, one, it confirmed my passion for teaching, but two, I kind of really found my passion for science. Right? I had to revisit my old textbooks, relearn the basics of physics, biology, chemistry. And I think in that process is when I really kind of fell in love with science. And I wanted to participate in it in a more contribute to it in a more direct way, more than just teaching. So when I came back to Cal Poly Pomona, I decided I should probably join a research lab. So that's what I did. I did some electrophysiology, looking at the effects of Huntington's disease on skeletal muscle cells. But long story short, that eventually led to an internship at Caltech, which was kind of my foot in the door. And we're going to talk about all the great things about Caltech, so I won't say why I really wanted to pursue a PhD there. But here I am, I'm in the 5th year, and I'm studying what I think is one of the most interesting organelles of the cell, which is the mitochondrion. So many of you probably already know about it. You've heard of it as the powerhouse of the cell, because it provides the energy that the cell needs to basically perform all of its functions. So I guess more specifically, without getting into the nitty-gritty, I study how mitochondria fuse to each other, how they divide, and what relevance that has to human health.
So as everybody heard, basically we're a bunch of Caltech boys, and my story is similar. My background is in physics, computer science, and electrical engineering. I transferred from Pasadena City College to Caltech some years ago. After graduation, I did IC design for cell phones, and then I ended up at Jet Propulsion Laboratory doing RF and microwave design. I worked on various flight projects and 9 flight projects, including Mars Science Laboratory that's currently running on Mars. And I'm also working on next Mars rover, which is supposed to fly in 2020. We call it M2020. And we're going to talk about JPL as well. But before going there, I'd like to talk about Caltech a little bit, give you a little sort of information about Caltech for those of you who are not familiar with the place. California Institute of Technology, or the way we call it, the only Institute of Technology, as opposed to MIT, sorry for the MIT guys, is located in Pasadena. It's a fairly small school. If you drive down from 210 freeway on Lake or Hill towards basically south, you'll end up at Caltech. Student population for undergraduate is around 900. That's it, 900 students. PhD and graduate students at Caltech, there are approximately 1,200, 1,200, and the faculty is approximately 300. So the ratio right there is, the ratio of faculty to students is 3:1, which is outstanding. Caltech is a world-renowned institution for science and engineering. Many pioneering research during the last 120 years has happened at Caltech, and I think we're going to talk about that in fairly detail. There is also JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is managed by Caltech, and at some point I'm going to talk about the story of JPL and how it actually ended up to be the crown jewel of NASA. But with that, I think I'm going to pass on to Greg and
Yeah, I mean, I think I can echo on some of what you said about Caltech being world-renowned. I think it was the Times Higher Education. They ranked Caltech as the #1 university 4 times in a row. And, you know, other ranking systems often place Caltech as one of the top universities in the world. And I think one of the strengths is really just fundamental research. And, you know, probably the most relevant statistic that can speak to that, I think, is the number of Nobel Prizes that have been awarded. So Caltech has 35, despite its very small size. It's basically the highest number of prizes per capita. So, I mean, that says a lot about the university. And in addition to that, Caltech, you know, runs JPL, like Richard was saying, and I'm sure he'll share some more stories about that. The Seismological Laboratory, which probably all of you have heard about in some way, you know, about major earthquakes. The news source is often coming from there. More recently, LIGO, which was a collaboration with MIT. They, I think, just recently detected these gravitational waves that Einstein actually predicted like over 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's like Albert Einstein was not the only scientist. There's like a large array of scientists that were at Caltech and researchers that pioneered many fields. In quantum mechanics, for example, Richard Feynman or Robert Millikan, that's a very famous people. In terms of astrophysics and theoretical physics, Stephen Hawking and Kip Thorne did a lot of great work in that area and contributed to the field of understanding gravitational wave. On the other hand, there's also like a lot of great scientists that are part of Caltech. For example, Carver Mead did a lot of frontier work for semiconductor physics that basically is the backbone of all the electronics devices that we have. There's also great scientists and engineers such as Gordon Moore, who's basically co-founder of Intel. Nowadays, all electronics have a microprocessor unit that most of these microprocessor units are manufactured by Intel Corporation, and that was co-founded by a guy in Caltech. Do you want to go on?
yeah, so with that, I'm going to jump to JPL. So as I said, Jet Propulsion Laboratory is predating NASA. The story goes that in mid-1930s, a bunch of Caltech students from Professor von Karman's lab were doing experiments at Caltech, basically blowing up stuff, experimenting with jet fuels and trying to make rockets work. City of Pasadena comes to them and says, hey, if you want to blow yourself up, go to the mountains. So they basically went to San Gabriel Mountains, and that's how JPL started. In late 50s, when Russians launched Sputnik, U.S. government tasked Caltech to U.S. Navy to build the first satellite, but they couldn't do it. And then they came to JPL and said, why don't you guys do it? So JPL built Explorer 1, which is the first satellite that U.S. had. And with that, it was the launch of U.S. space program. Afterwards, NASA was founded by U.S. government, but JPL is still a Caltech's lab, technically speaking, with approximately 7,000 people. JPL is an FFRDC, federally funded research and development center, and all the robotics programs that are in deep space, including the Deep Space Network, which is in Spain, Australia, and in California. If you go to Vegas, on the way you can go to Galveston. So all of these facilities are run by JPL. The unique thing about JPL is that starting from project formulation all the way to project execution and design and putting the whole thing together, rover, satellite, whatever it is, it happens at JPL. Everything we do, we have the expertise in the house except the launch. Launch, obviously, launch of the satellite or the rover happens at Cape Canaveral or from other launch facilities. But then we have the scientists to analyze the data, and we have the engineers who build the machines and rovers and satellites. So in a way, it's a unique place. And I'm sure everybody knows it's off of 210 freeway, so it's fairly close to Glendale and that adjacent area. Approximately 150 Armenians are working there with technical background. I would say probably 80 to 100 people Armenian descent are working there. So with that, I think this is a good time to jump to Caltech, and why don't you guys share stories, personal stories, with how Caltech shaped you, or some aspects of Caltech's life.
I can start with the core education. I guess, like Richard said, we started doing rocketry. So a lot of this comes from fundamental knowledge. And the reason it's all relevant is part of Caltech's core education is all these mathematics, physics, biology, chemistry, multiple classes in the humanities, social sciences. So, I mean, even if you're going to pursue an English degree, you're forced to take all the physics and all the math and basically advanced levels of calculus, differential equations, and I'm not going to even go into that. But this makes us well-rounded. It embeds in us a level of fundamental knowledge, and it changes the way we perceive problems, the way we perceive the world, in terms of how we approach it. So, and part of this, part of like the Nobel Prizes, for example, a lot of this comes from a fundamental concept that has been developed and matured into something that's world-changing, something that's very relevant. And not only that, it's a kind of incubator for allowing you to, because you can't really choose your major, right? None of you guys choose your major until your second year. So they allow you to explore yourself and see what you like and then pursue the path that you're that you can best adapt to, I guess. But I guess why is it all relevant? Because everybody does something else. We were part of the robotics team. We had 40 some odd students that were actively participating. One's a physics major, one's a math major. You got some guy that's doing economics, whatever it is, but all of us come together and we collaborate. We collaborate on a project that teaches us how to work with each other. It teaches us how to solve difficult problems. It teaches us how to get funding, deal with people. It's like a small community, and all of that's relevant to the real world. I think it's all life skills. It's all stuff we need to know and need to do.
And it makes you who you are, actually, a well-rounded individual who can apply scientific methodology and all the basic fundamentals of science to every problem that you encounter in life. Artsrun, why don't you talk about some of your stories?
I'll tell some interesting stories. First, I want to say that now that I hope my story is more in context about how good it is to have a couple Armenians here. If you think about it, there's less than 1,000 undergraduates at Caltech. The fact that we even have a couple Armenian undergrads there is pretty big, so we really should strive to get some more. So I want to talk about some aspects of Caltech's model, the way they do things that makes it such a great place for innovation. And I'm going to start off with a personal story. Torgo mentioned that he was part of the robotics team for 2 years, which I lead now. As with the robotics team, we participate in an underwater submarine competition in San Diego. It's about 2 hours away from where Caltech is located. Essentially, you have to build a submarine from scratch and get it to autonomously navigate through obstacles and complete some tasks. So we were at the competition this past July, and we had 2 opportunities to qualify for the finals. Our first qualifications run was a disaster. Everything was just not working well, just things were going wrong. And we decided that we're going to need to run some tests in our pool back at Caltech to really figure out what's going on and have a chance at qualifying, So let's put this in context. It's about 6 p.m. We're 2 hours away from the school. Next qualifying run is at noon tomorrow, and we need a pool. So I called the athletic department. I explained the situation, plead for them to use the pool. They're the only ones who have a pool deep enough for our uses. And the receptionist was cooperative at first, but as soon as she figured out I'm trying to do a test late at night, she kind of just panicked and said she had to go, hung up the phone on me. So that wasn't very successful. And we were pretty desperate. So at this point, we ended up contacting the director of student activities. It's a small school. You have his cell phone number. Everybody knows each other. A few minutes passed by. It turns out that this guy not only got us used to the pool, he also got the school's full-time lifeguards to show up from midnight to 9 a.m. just to make sure everybody's okay while we're doing a pool test. He got security to stand by overnight just to make sure everything is okay. So it's 10 p.m., we're all sleep deprived, we load up the cars, drive 2 hours to Pasadena, do an overnight pool test, 9 a.m., load the cars back up, drive back to San Diego in 2 hours to do another qualifying run at noon. And all this was achievable just because of how the community got together. The reason I told this story was to highlight some of these aspects. First of all, it's really a community effort. I mean, this collaboration that happened wasn't just between researchers and scientists, it was between support staff. I mean, this director of student activities, it's a Friday night. He didn't have to pick up his phone and help out the robotics team. Lifeguards didn't have to show up with their personal life on a Friday night just to supervise and make sure everything is okay. But, you know, it's the school's robotics team, they need help. The community gets together to make that happen. Another big thing about how things are done at Caltech is there are really no boundaries to how much you can push the rules and bend them. And it's all a part of this honor code that Richard will choose to talk about a little later on. But it's essentially the school is trusting us to use the pool. I mean, I can understand why the administration wouldn't be too excited about the proposition of a bunch of undergrads using the pool on a Friday night. A million different things can go wrong, right? But, you know, they saw we're desperate and we needed to use this facility and they made it happen. So it just breeds innovation whenever you get the community to support what's really going on. And Caltech's small size makes that achievable. And I want to pass it to Richard to talk more about our honor code.
Part of what Artsurun highlight is that at Caltech we have this code of conduct. It's called Caltech's Honor Code, in which states that no Caltech member should take unfair advantage of any other Caltech member. And this goes not only for the students, but for the faculty, for the staff, and everybody. And believe it or not, people stick to this honor code system. As a result of this honor code, there are take-home exams, for example, with timed timed take-home exams, and faculty trust the students to take this take-home exam and take it, duration of a week. The instruction, for example, can say, hey, you can take this take-home exam, closed book, by the way, you're not supposed to open the book, and you can bring it back in within the week. So one of my friends took this mathematics exam, and it was the same thing, closed book, 3 hours timed exam. And one thing about Caltech is that we work so hard, basically you don't have social life, you don't have sleep, your stomach gets crazy during the couple of years that you're there. So this friend of mine took the exam, went home, and he felt dizzy. He just closed his eyes for a couple of minutes just to relax a little bit, woke up, 3 hours passed already. So guess what he did? He wrote his name, closed the exam, and brought it back to the faculty and said, this was a timed exam, I wasn't supposed to go more than 3 hours. Just that highlights the trust that the Caltech community has on its own members, and that's actually a very, very important aspect of innovation and creativity, because at the end of the day, if you don't trust each other, the core concept of questioning everything and the core concept of scientific methodology and scientific endeavor is not going to work. I'm going to ask Greg to actually talk about collaboration versus competition, and if you can give some examples on that too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can chime in very quickly. I mean, I think overall Caltech is just a very collaborative place. I think when I was first going to Caltech as an undergrad, I was a little bit intimidated because you hear all these stories, there's all these brilliant people, but when I got there, everybody was very friendly, very helpful, and like Richard was saying earlier, because of this low student to faculty ratio, students can actually get to interact with the professors, with senior scientists. And this, plus the collaborative nature, I think is a very, it fosters self-growth for students. So it's a great place to do research as a student. As an undergrad or a graduate school, I have similar experiences.
And there is no competition. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all collaboration-based versus competition-based.
Yeah, I mean, in my lab specifically, we all kind of have our own independent research projects, so no one's really stepping on each other's toes. We can help each other, we collaborate at times, but everybody has an independent thing that's kind of their own. Other places, sometimes they'll put multiple people on the same project and say, hey, whoever gets there first gets the big prize. So that's a nice change about Caltech.
Anything you want to add to that? Yeah, so I also had a similar experience in terms of working on a very collaborative environment. So I'm currently working on electronics and optics and integrated system, but in undergrad I decided to do this project that involved heavy biological testing and experimentation. And as an electrical engineer, I didn't have the necessary background to understand and to perform the task. But I was really excited about this biomedical device project. So I committed to it, but to do that, I needed to take advanced courses that I don't have the requirements for. But the admission or the office of student affairs really allows students to decide what's good for them. If you want to take a challenging advanced course and you can't handle it, they let you do it. So I took a few advanced courses, build up the foundation, and start working on the project. The other interesting thing is that because it's such a small community, it's like a family. So whenever I had difficulty in any aspect of my project, people from chemistry department or biology department would spend hours trying to explain how things are, how I should approach it, what helped me debug the experimentation. So I went from not knowing how to do this on any level to understanding the theory and completing the experimentation in 6-7 months. This all happened because I was in a place that really, the faculty and the staff really, and the body of students really supported for this to happen.
Low bureaucracy, basically.
Yeah.
If you want to do anything, you can just walk onto any professor, in any lab, and start a conversation, and right there an idea can be born. Torgum, do you want to talk about some aspects of action? By the way, a trivia, so Torgum and Artyom were my students at Glendale Community College, so I'm kind of also personally related to their stories. Do you want to talk about action learning, active learning, and why it's relevant for today's actually concept of reimagining? And
So, I mean, I guess it's a privilege for us to live in this day and age where we have a lot of tools that are available to us. There's a tent outside with a 3D printer. I mean, the nice thing about these 3D printers, for example, it provides for rapid iteration. Let's say you're taking your first attempt at something, you build some mechanical part, you print it in a few hours or overnight, you take it the next day, you try it out, doesn't work, you learn from your mistakes, you figure out what you need to change and what you need to fix, you go back, you print another one, and it's this rapid back and forth until you get it right. And in that process, you're developing your skill set, you're understanding what kind of problems could arise so that in the future you're better prepared for it. But I mean, this is a nice thing about like we have next day shipping. You could send something out to China, get it made, and get it sent back the next day, and have it in front of you within a few days, and like for circuit boards, for example. And it allows us to grow and develop and make things very, very quickly. Yeah, I think it's an integral part of learning, and is the ability to see and learn from your mistakes, and kind of not just reading a textbook, but physically doing something until you get it right.
so we have 3 minutes. Why don't we wrap up the conversation with some ideas on rethinking, relearning, reimagining, and how everything that we do is relevant to today. So Arvind, yeah.
Yeah, so there's, when you come to the world of research, it's very different from the like homeschool or the homework you do. There's problems you're trying to solve may not necessarily have an answer. So every time you're trying to achieve a certain project or you want to do a demonstration, you run into different roadblocks. And at every different roadblocks, you have to stop, take a step back, look at the basics, try to understand every aspect of it, look at different perspectives, analyze and evaluate your assumptions. Maybe you need to change and correct on that. But it's a really, it involves constant rethinking and, about your work. So.
Yeah, I mean, kind of along similar lines, I think the entire kind of scientific method revolves around rethinking and relearning, right? I mean, whether you're a biologist or whatever it is, you make some observation, right, of the world around you, either directly or using some instrument, right, say microscope, and you have this model, but the model is not absolute truth. Because I think in science, as soon as you accept something as absolute truth with no room for change, you can't have progress anymore. Because you know that tomorrow or next year or whenever, when there's better technology or whatnot, you can make a new observation that might force you to change your current model, your current view of the world. So I think science progresses for the very reason that you're constantly forcing yourself, allowing yourself to relearn, rethink your view of the world.
Even if it's not intuitive.
Yeah, even if it's not intuitive.
It's
I mean,
actually-
I think Einstein's a good example of that, right? Anybody want to talk about that?
So actually, I was going to talk about a more abstract concept of how ideas transmit through generations. And any idea, no matter what it is, it's a function of its longevity, how long it survives, fecundity, how many people subscribe to that idea, and also copying fidelity. It means when ideas are passed through generations from one generation to the other generation, the next generation, how much of that idea is exactly being copied from generation to generation? Interestingly enough, progress happens when that idea is not copied exactly. So so there's this duality of if I basically just take on the whole idea as a whole and just implement it itself, or just subscribe to it, or change it a little bit, and progress happens when the change happens. And this has been true for many scientific ideas. For example, the concept of light and the duality of light. Was it a particle? Was it a wave? And the fight between Huygens' camp and Newtonian camp, that Huygens' camp was saying it was a wave, but the Newtonian camp was saying it was a particle, and that fight was going on for generations among the physicists until quantum mechanics came and said, you know what, it's actually both. So after 1900, this question of what is light, is it particle or is it light, is it wave, was an irrelevant question, because the physicists, next generation physicists, knew that it's actually both. When it's interacting with matter, light is a particle, but when it's traveling in space, light is nothing but a wave. This story highlights the concept of rethinking and changing the viewpoint on any given ideology or concept, and how we should not just take everything for as an absolute truth, and from time to time we need to re-question everything. With that, our time has ended. I hope that we introduced some basic concepts to you guys, and thank you very much for attending to our talk.